Tonight, I think, is going to be a real highlight for me anyway. So hello and welcome to everyone. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be with you all tonight, however virtually. And thank you to Alyssa Doro for the hard work that you do to make it possible for us all to be together like this, even for a few moments, and to learn from each other as a community of writers and scholars. And I'm really excited to hear new work from my colleague, Valerie Sayers, who is a hero and someone whose aesthetic and political and pedagogical questing and compassion has always both anchored and inspired me. I can't wait to hear the new work. It's been a long time since I did one of these intros, but I'm trying to rustily remember. I guess we are brought to you tonight by the Creative Writing Program in the Department of English, Our Ladies University, the letters MFA. And in addition, we have already had a number of really exciting and vivid events this semester, which has been so tonic. And amazingly, we have 3 really exciting events coming up just within the next week. So I'll do the brief plug for those and then we'll get down to business. On Friday at noon, there's a virtual webinar, which is the Literatures of Annihilation, Exile, and Resistance reading, which is going to be given by Ibtisam Azem. I'm sorry for my ignorance, but if we attend this virtual webinar, we'll be able to learn from this author and their voice. And this is part of a new initiative that was co-founded by Azarine, the director of our very own creative writing program. So that's something to put on your calendar. And then next week, we have 2 super exciting readings too. On Tuesday, October 6th, from 6:30 to 8, Stacey Levine is reading, which I'm psyched about. And I'm equally psyched for the poetry reading on October 7th from 7 to 9, which is the Wednesday, which will be Sarah Denise Akant, who is a writer of such innovative and lively and wild work. Both those women are. So all the details and how to Zoom, I suppose, are on the creative writing portion of the English department's website. So come check it out. And please attend these while you're having your lunch, while you're thinking about your future. It'll be great to have you there. Okay, so Valerie and I put our heads together and we thought that we would take advantage of this sort of unusual sharing of stage and screen together to introduce or reintroduce ourselves to those of you in the community we have not yet met face-to-face or not seen in some time. So I generated this kind of self-introduction Mad Libs for us to use, and we sort of use that as the rubric. I literally filled in the blanks. Valerie might have exerted herself in a more creative direction. And it was a strangely stimulating, but a little bit chastening experience to see how I would answer these very basic self-introductory questions. So I'm going to read my introduction to myself and then hand the mic, the Zoom mic, to Valerie, who will introduce herself and perform her lovely reading. And then I guess the mic comes back to me to close it out with my reading. That's the plan. So intro, Valerie reads, I read, we all go into the beautiful gloaming, and that's it. Okay, so hello, new friends and old friends. I am Joyelle McSweeney, and I'm a professor of poetry here at Notre Dame. And I'm going to read tonight mostly from my new book, Toxicon and Arachne. So this is my 10th book. It is my 4th book of poetry because I've also published a book of short fictions, 2 lyric genre novels, a verse play, and a book of Gothic eco-poetics called the Necropastoral. My interests include sound, hyperdiction, the lyric, hybrid forms and performance, art as an event, and the strange, powerful, occult, aesthetic, and political energies released by unexpected engagements among authors, languages, forms, and texts. Engagements I've called strange meetings. Looking back at my books, I am surprised and pleased to watch a curiosity about form and language course through all the books. And I'm pleased by, I made us say things we were pleased by. Imagine. Okay, I am pleased by the consistency of, she may have skipped this prompt, the consistency of my engagement in the political energy released by unlikely aesthetic circuitry, and how each book has represented and unfolded a set of generative inquiries that have kept me moving forward. So a few other things about me. This is really difficult, more difficult than it seems. So with Professor Johannes Göransson and Kenyan Professor Kate Hedin and MFA alum Paul Cunningham and MFA candidate Austin Vollers, I edit the International Press Action Books, and I have for about 15 years, which is a press mostly for writing and translation, and it kind of leans towards the aesthetically and politically exuberant side. I've had my sense of poetry's possibilities and potencies enlarged and activated from contacts with poets like Raul Zarita, Kim Hasoon, Osabai, and many others who have persisted in plumbing art's gloomy heavens and ecstatic depths. My hope for the future, can you imagine completing the sentence? My hope for the future is, whew, my hope for the future, both for myself and for my writing, is to remain fearless in moving through art's contradictory, political, and ecstatic, and to be a channel for the kind of art with a capital A that releases charges of possibility and unexpected lashings of energy through an otherwise defeating world. That's my self-introduction. And now I will hand this mic happily to Valerie, who will introduce herself and read.
All right, I'm Valerie, and I clearly did not follow instructions because I read your questions, Joyelle, and I thought I was answering them, but I can hear in your own response that mine's a little more freeform. Let me say first, I'm just tickled to be reading tonight with Joyelle. As those of you who know her know, Joyelle's never had a timid thought. She's never settled for an obvious word. She's never confined herself, as you just heard, to a single genre. She's never repeated herself. So I give her plenty of credit for loosening up my own tight writing nerves. For many years, I defined myself as a novelist, someone who chases after a single phrase of narrative music and ends up entangled in complex themes. Someone who finds herself untwisting a knotted plot and living with difficult roommates year after year. Before I called myself a novelist, however, I had a secret literary past littered with bad poetry and plays. I achieved spectacular failures in the short story department. Stories are, for me, the most elusive literary form, the most difficult for me to achieve. So for about 10 or 12 years, I just didn't write any. I quit them altogether. And I didn't pick them up again until after I arrived at Notre Dame, where I could hardly ask my students to write in a genre I was afraid to confront. So the stories I'm going to read tonight, or rather the snippets of stories I'm going to read tonight, because the format doesn't really allow for the reading of an entire story, are actually the result of writing and reading and conceptualizing alongside my delightful students, undergraduate and graduate, and shamelessly soaking up lessons from them, to say nothing of stealing ideas outright. So thank you, all my students, past and present. This new collection of stories is called The Age of Infidelity. These are stories as intrigued by narrative play as they are fretful about politics and philosophy. I regard them all as comic and dead serious. They're stories about infidelities of all kinds. We live in a faithless age, don't you know it? An age of hookup apps and on-screen rants, and an age of fearful isolation and mean politics. We're surrounded by plenty, but we lust over what we can't have. We know what's coming, and still we find it ever so hard to stay true. My age of infidelity is a long one. It starts in the 1950s and it stretches out into a near future of spiritual, political, and planetary degradation. So if that sounds cheerful, let me just say that some of the characters in these stories, I'm happy to say, can still locate a sense of obligation. They're partial to plain talk in the American grain, but they like foreign language, and they like language to be surprising in all ways. They like a good joke, a bad pun, and a long spin on the dance floor. The collection stories are all so different in form from one another. I thought tonight I'd just give you a little sampling from 3 stories, kind of an oral thumb through, like the one you might perform when you were standing at a bookstore shelf, if you can still remember standing at a bookstore shelf. But before I begin writing, I wanted to thank a few people, my wonderful colleagues in the creative writing program, beginning with Alyssa Dora, who sets up these readings so beautifully. And here's a little show and tell. Oh, I can't see my image, so I don't even know if I'm hitting this on screen. This is the beautiful image that Maria Tomasula allowed me to use for the book. It's a print called When I Was You, which I think would also be a lovely title for this book. But here to get rolling is the opening of the first story in the Age of Infidelity. It's called Suicide Dogs. Once upon a time we haven't yet lived through, but I know we will, and you know it too. I moved to the outskirts of Greenglass with my young son and daughter. Their father had left us, and I decided, under the circumstances, that we'd be better off a little distance from neighbors who were trying to scope out anything they could report to the Constitutional Guards. Besides, I thought we could plant a little garden to supplement the scant supplies I was allowed. As you can guess, the garden didn't work out. That first summer, I had only a handful of baby lettuces to gather before the rain streamed down and the river rose up. The landscape is flat, and I was flooded, sure as everybody else. The world was so wet that July, I thought I was seeping out of my own body, my eyes and ears leaking day and night. I couldn't help but wonder if it was some new punishment they dreamed up. One day when the rain and the hail pelted down together, the children and I heard a peculiar rustling outside. I cracked the front door open and watched a scruffy creature shake herself under what was left of our awning. She was a mid-sized mutt, her hair neither short nor long, but thick and yellow, red-tinged, matted with rain. When I opened the door a little wider, against my better judgment, the dog made a dignified promenade into our little front room and proceeded to lay herself down on the straw mat as if she'd lived with us forever. She cocked her head to one side, awaiting further instruction. Well, you know about children and yellow dogs. Pete and Annie gazed on her with reverence. I made the usual objections. Her people must be looking. We barely had enough food for ourselves. But I knew from the first that she had joined our exile. You have to respect a dame who just strolls in and makes herself at home. We called her Ruby. That same summer, Pete witnessed his first dog suicide. One afternoon when the rain let up, he went on a ramble through what was left of the woods, and on his way home he saw another yellow dog biding his time by the side of the road. Rabies was rampant again, so he hung back. He was waiting for a truck to come fast. Pete, sweetie, we can't know that. I know, I watched him. He was looking up and down the road. I bet lots of trucks passed. They were too slow, you know what I mean. Pete was only 7 that year, still young enough to let me touch him, still beautiful. He was the opposite of me, serious, responsible. His dark hair climbed up his forehead before it fell back down, and the freckles on his cheeks matched the walnut shade of his curls. He said this dog stood patient as a guard on duty while the slow convoys ambled through. But as soon as he heard the rumble of the solo truck racing to catch up, he crouched and sprang. The driver didn't stop, so it was up to my little boy to drag the mangled, oozing body from the asphalt to the ditch. The buzzards were circling by the time he headed home. I scrubbed him up, down, and sidewise, but he said he'd watched the dog long enough to be sure. No foaming, nothing strange. Nothing strange but throwing himself in front of a truck. So I suppose I was beginning to believe it even then. Ruby sat quiet, listening to his story, while I cleaned the blood and the goo at the kitchen sink. So that was Dog Suicides intro. And now I'm going to read the beginning of a story that looks backward in time instead of looking forward. It begins with a collective voice, a we, which is an exercise I give my students all the time. And again, eventually I just had to do this exercise myself. But I thought that the collective voice might be a particularly good choice to write about white teenagers who are kind of herd-like animals to begin with. And this takes place in the early days of school integration. So the story is called Tidal Wave. In the early days of integration, when only white girls tried out for cheerleader, our elections were a cross between small-town participatory democracy, Soviet-style anointment of the chosen, and the Miss America pageant. We sat wrapped in the bleachers while the candidates cartwheeled in front of the whole school, flashing their white panties. Then we trooped back to homeroom to cast our votes. We were chatterers, smarty pants, A-track girls who raised our hands on one beat and never let the boys get a word in edgewise. We would never be cheerleaders, but we knew what it took. A cheerleader didn't need to be pretty, though most of ours were pretty as a matter of fact. And a cheerleader didn't need to be athletic, although some of ours weren't too shabby in the handstand department. A cheerleader only needed to exude unshakable self-confidence, and maybe as a corollary, to beam bubbly friendliness and make it look like it wasn't fake. We knew all about fake friendliness. We were growing up in South Carolina, for God's sake. All our stories are unresolved high school stories. We were the tidal wave, the class of '69 at Due East High School, our school years punctuated by assassinations and riots, by the Tet Offensive, by flower children in San Francisco, whose very existence suggested that we were living in some remote outpost of civilization that didn't get updates on a regular basis. The Due East boys who couldn't get a word in edgewise volunteered to go to war, while the rest of America burned its draft cards. We heard that Bo Channing, who just moved to Due East from 29 Palms, smoked pot, but we couldn't imagine where he got hold of it or what would happen if the MPs caught him with it on base. We couldn't imagine what we would do if Bo Channing cast his icy hot gaze on us. We were a chorus that sang with one voice, and now, in every Facebook post, we hear one of those voices standing close. We spend all our waking hours online poring over photos, but the only one we really care about seeing again is Vonda Freeman's. She was our homecoming queen, our sweetheart of Due East High, and once upon a time, we A-track girls were her court. She was, yes, our head cheerleader. She was also the most self-contained girl we ever knew, so we're not surprised she boycotts Facebook. But that doesn't stop us from looking at her day and night. That doesn't stop us from craving her love. The minute we saw Vonda Freeman in freshman year when she stepped off the bus from St. Elizabeth's Island, we were stunned by her eyes, a strange light green. Would she mesmerize the boys the way she mesmerized us? We weren't entirely sure she was beautiful because redheads not supposed to be beautiful, and the auburn brows framing her cat eyes drew too thick a line. She wasn't even tanned, which was a challenge to everything we knew about the attributes of beautiful girls. Mr. Thigsby said we were ignorant little yahoos the way we slathered on baby oil and roasted ourselves at the beach, when for centuries poets had known that the most beautiful skin was alabaster skin. Look at Botticelli's Venus. Look at Vonda Freeman, for God's sake. So we all did. We twisted in our seats towards the back of the room where Vonda's face had turned one of those fiery shades that is certainly not alabaster. She wore an expression we had never seen on each other's faces before, a combination of pain and shame and sweetness. And she stared down at her desk so assiduously that Mr. Thigsby said, "Vonda Sugar, I most certainly did not mean to put you on the spot, but now you have perfectly illustrated feminine grace." Later, we all agreed that she finally allowed herself to look up that day with her slow breaking smile, her eyes darting toward Margaret Washington and Marcus Toomer, who stared out the window as assiduously as Vonda had stared down at her desk, while the white folk discussed the perfect shade of pale. And here's the last story called Company. This last excerpt comes from a setting in the present, but it's filled with resentments from the past. And the backstory is this: the narrator's lover once accused her of exploiting his Latino identity. And now, as the story opens, he's disabled, and she wonders all over again how much exploitation she's capable of. This is Company, which is a Stephen Sondheim musical, actually. I just realized that. You can't copyright a title, though. When Lily calls to say I should come talk some sense into Diego before he ends up destroying himself, I remind her that I've made a point of avoiding that sweet cheater for years and years now. He seems to have managed just fine. Fine? He's been on hunger strike since this last surgery. What surgery? She rolls it out as if it's old news. Last week, after all those years of diabetes, they amputated again. I don't know about any diabetes, much less years of it. I don't know about any amputation. Vertigo swoops me up. Lily says that the surgeon is waiting to see whether the right foot will have to go too, so I stop listening entirely. While the world somersaults, I catch sight of a skinny leg hacked off mid-thigh. I see ribbons of bloody flesh and hear Diego, flaneur, lover of women, cockadoodler, howl. Once upon a middle-aged time, reader, Diego O'Dowd and I lived together in an artist co-op I'd founded back in the days when artists in downtown Manhattan bought decrepit lofts, unsafe at any price, with money they begged from respectable relatives. By the time Diego moved in, I was 40 and Diego 50. Our marginal existences long established. My proper Southern mother had almost resigned herself to my unmarried, childless state, though I'm pretty sure she never resigned herself to Diego. We painted at opposite ends of the same studio where we slept, breathing in the toxic fumes of our art, and we consoled each other about our rescinded charge cards, our adjunct teaching gigs, our dwindling shows. We ranted together about the torture regime Diego once fled. I even made a little film about his uninsured adventures in emergency rooms. We danced tangos, Diego counting time to keep me in step. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, he returned triumphant from a night of bar hopping and stood at the refrigerator door considering the sparse pickings. In the light of our antique icebox, his belly hung loose and easy, his skin darkening with the wine he downed and the moles that sprouted like mushrooms as he aged before my eyes. His appetite was insatiable, and so was mine. Why, reader, did his flaccid arms and skinny legs make me so tender? Why did I crave his touch? Other artists moved on to video, to text, to performance, but Diego, who wasn't faithful to much, was faithful to paint. His colors were sublime. His subjects were women, nudes who morphed into fruits and vegetables, surreal mangoes and artichokes in neon colors of such pure intensity that I prickled in their presence. He bragged, he bellowed, he fretted about his grown daughter in Buenos Aires, but did he go to see her? No, he put a scratchy LP on the turntable, came to stand over our bed in the small hours of the morning, and held his hand out. Just one, Maisie, and then we sleep like angels. I'd been sleeping like an angel till he woke me. I rose to dance. When my little film about a swaggering artist sans medical insurance made it into Sundance, Diego fevered up with jealousy. Your exotic Latin lover with empty pockets, he sneered. But maybe you'll make a dime off me. All that was long, long ago, reader, another lifetime. Now I'm a retired best documentary professor living in paradise. I have bought myself a marshside house in a southern hometown I once fled the way Diego once fled Argentina. I've made my peace with due east. Spanish moss festoons the live oaks outside my windows. Porpoises swoop in my tidal creek. The light is as surreal and sublime as Diego's colors ever were. And for the first time in my life, I have all the time I need for paint, that old honest pal. I'm perfectly content, past the need for company I didn't invite, certainly past the need for tangos with pot-bellied cheating men. I held on to my loft, so I get to the city when I need to, but lately, this place, this light, this time are all that I need. Only now, Lily, of all people, has summoned me. I'm in a sufficient state of shock to run the numbers. If I'm drawing Social Security, that makes Diego 76? Unfathomable. In his 70s, on one leg, Diego's probably even behaving. I indulge in an ugly sense of obligation, an overcooked, stewing in its own juices, Rivera and Kahlo, Picasso and his many mistresses, resentful woman, bitter fest, before I get round to sitting at the computer and Googling rock bottom air. It has always struck me as a perverse name for a travel site, and the prices don't look all that rock bottom to me. I slip into the hospital room while Diego's drooling and snorting. When he realizes someone's entered his dream, he blinks and blinks again, cartoon-like. His hair is still thick for an old man's hair. It's gone past gray to a zinky white, and in his new emaciated state, flesh loops down his jaws. At the sight of me, he lets loose a brief, delighted smile before he remembers where he is, what's happened, what might happen still. The other shoe, so to speak. The surgeon, Lily tells me, took his toes, then his foot, then his calf. This, it turns out, was the third surgery, the third mortification of the flesh. Now when he has nobody, I'm the lone volunteer or maybe the lone draftee to stand by this hospital bed. I contemplate the unlikeliness of Diego securing a bed in the first place. If he even bothered to sign up for Medicare, I'll know I've witnessed a miracle. He clamps his eyes shut. I retreat to the visitor's chair, and Diego, struggling his hips into a bearable position, retreats to dark silence. I think I can see, under the thin sheet, where they took the leg, just below the knee. I see his missing calf, too, its sparse hairs white as the hairs on his head, springing absurdly from a shin like a palmetto's trunk. I see his thick yellowing toenails, too much effort to hack through all these years. Now a surgeon's gone and hacked the whole thing. I want that leg. I want to paint it. What's the matter with me? Haven't I exploited him enough? That leg's no symbol, God knows. That leg's no metaphor. Its absence is as loud as the sad buzz of the fluorescent lights. The nurse finally arrives, lumped into pastel scrubs, every inch of her lethargized by Diego's summons. What's up, Diego? He won't even open his eyes. Tell this lady to leave or I'll call my lawyer. This lady. As if I'm some do-gooder who comes to harass him to remind him that he needs to lose some weight, cut back on the drinking, stop picking up every downtown babe too nearsighted to see how old he really is. He can't call a lawyer unless I pay the bill. What can I do? The nurse shrugs back. What can she do? And so we might all ask, what can we all do? Except look forward to this next reading from my old honest pal, Joyelle McSweeney.
All right. Well, those are some wild and really wonderful sentences, and I love what we discovered in them too. So thank you, Valerie. So I'm going to read from this book, Toxicon and Arachne. It's got kind of a spooky matte and metallic cover. And as you might guess from the split title of my book, this is a double volume of poetry, a double volume about calamity, political, global, local, obviously environmental, and finally personal. The first volume, Toxicon, I wrote in the years and months leading up to the birth of our third daughter, Arachne. And I was thinking a lot at that time about the lyric itself, lyric intensity. And as I was trying to work out that out in my mind, I was also thinking about Plato's description of writing as the pharmakon, or the drug that can kill or cure. I wanted to combine these two ideas, and I wanted to create a collection of lyric poetry that would be like a quiver of poison arrows, that would fly keenly and carry all the horror and beauty of life on this planet as it flew, and that would lay a fatal hit to the heart. I learned as I went along that the word toxin actually refers etymologically to a poison arrow. And so it was clear then that I had to name my quiver of lyrics, my poison arrows, Toxicon. That let me think also, for all you writers out there, about how a poem could rise, ride, sink, find its mark, sink in its tooth, how it could be a literally killer lyric for a planet of killers, and for the dead and undead, human and otherwise. So those are my goals with Toxicon. So I'm going to start by reading some Toxicon to you. On one day I was sitting around feeling very uninspired, and somebody I was emailing with sort of challenged me to write a lunch poem. So here's my lunch poem. It's called Sight. And it was written the first time the polar vortex really got its cold hands on this town. In a station of the vortex, pick me up and hurl me on the prow of a ship named for a queen. Christen with a broken bottle if you Christ me, split my brow. Blue bottle, green bottle, fly, diadem me, black beat, turtleneck, beat, box me back in. You might hear someone crying in the background. I'll start this one over. Sight. In a station of the vortex, pick me up and hurl me on the prow of a ship named for a queen. Christen with a broken bottle if you Christ me, split my brow. Blue bottle, green bottle, fly, diadem me, black beat, turtleneck, beat, box me back in. This is the horse I rode in on when I met my G.I. John off base. He slew me, and not nicely. Now his ships come in, carrying hurlitzers, howitzers, howler monkeys on the lamb from the lab. It's carrying a queen bee and her packed punches. The last of her stingers is stuck up the cram of wake. I mean quake. I mean punches pulled, holds barred, honey pooled, the drinking water of West Virginia mad with chemicals and running off in greasy beads. That state named for a virgin queen. She wore a coat of ermine tails, each with a black smudge to prove its whiteness. The ermine rather die, while the coal smut stoke grieves swartly in the scuttle. Oh, honey, it pullulates and seals a bard's throat like letters of execution. Imperial pallor, the pillbox like a bad number. Without a chin strap, it slips. Goldfinger, barf. I shot the queen and lost my lunch. I shot the queen and left my tote of Kotex on the piano and my cast-off screenplay and my address book and my extra gun. I beat retreat. Made a nest of spun spittle within my nest of scum. I'm not an actress, I'm a writer. The joysticked boys sink arrows into the ozone. If we can't have bees, we'll have drones. So this is a poem about the lawlessness of the so-called law enforcers and just how much death we are willing to tolerate in this country to get what we want, who we is, and what we're gonna do about it, I guess. It's called Drill Down in the Fly Room. One eye lidless wants to close, one pupil wants to contract, one valve wants to over-emote, two arms want to cramp instinctively back into their fetal attitude of flight or hug their own spine from the wrong side. What is it to survive? Or lie cosseted in a coma, a bombilation of effects, a thicket of causes, white-eyed, black-fledged quiver of hyphens falls like arrows through the centuries, then closes the skull, camera obscura, drape of error. The dash cam spills its ribbon of data up in green pools above the blood bank. In dim clouds, stars rise. Each breast wears a badge that brays like a crowned tooth in a grave. This smashed clock stays right all day. Under the coroner's saw, the heart bears a crown of burst vessels. The sapiens is diadem with cabochons and fractures. It's coronation day. The morgue drawer rolls back. Coldness is a lack, yet here's an increase. Morning unrolls its bombazine. So I, of course, made a careful plan of what I wanted to read to you, and now I'm darting all around my book. This next poem is an ode, I would say. It's for Alejandra Negrete. And Alejandra Negrete was a domestic worker in Mexico City, and she was killed at work during the assassination of her employer, who was a journalist. So he was assassinated, several people he was with were assassinated. When the news stories were written about this, she was just referred to as a domestic worker. Her name wasn't given or anything about her death. I was just, you know, all these important people and then a domestic worker. And so the domestic workers of Mexico City launched a movement in the streets asking people to say her name. And so I wrote this poem as an ode and a way to say her name. I'm the speaker, and it's thinking about circuits of violence and complicity in violence, even violence that might be happening across the border, half a continent away. For Alejandra Negrete. Bleep, bleep. I get my neck out for the knife scene, a green smell, a green scene, because the nose bone's so close to the brain bone, and the brain doesn't have a bone. Only a series of seawalls and sea barriers. Tennis balls roll oafishly over the sea and knock against the blood-brain barrier. A tennis brat oaths and curses, every kind of lapsus, every slip of the tongue, marshy, licky, metacarpals, flight of women chased into the sky, commingled constellations, spines bones and breast bones, finger bones and ankle bones, skyline and strip mall, stape and stirrup, platform sandals, skinny jean, Alejandra Negrete, executed in the bathroom on her first afternoon. The sound we call static is really full of activity, percussing and injuring itself and sending the message back through the seashell to the ear canal to beat against the heart. How long can it beat itself up? Fucked up clock radio broadcasts its handful of beats like gravel hurled at a seawall, bursts its plastic carapace apart. The heart of time. Hurl that phrase like money from the coach of death. It's made of pulp, germs, and linen, the blood of slaves, the work of women. Even Baudelaire in his crown of syphilis wanted to work harder every day, wanted to become a clock of work. It rains, it hurts. Crown of thinking, jacket of spleen, jacket of little complaining proteins, cosseting the nerve, full metal jacket, magazine of coquettes touring the Louvre on the arm of Baudelaire, blushing into his notebook, blushing into a squib, even a kind of cream dissolving into the soup, even a kind of t-shirt around the torso of the teenager who is taking a break in the mass grave like a mall, breaking up with her boyfriend, reclining in her little plastic sheath. It's raining ropes. Which teen will fly out on the rope swing into the soup? Her body jerking the afternoon thick as carrageen, its album of albumin, its cream-laid pages, jerk off azimuth bitumen, bitter secretion in the back of the mouth, wing of madness, mass carapace that spasms, all the bones locked together and wing into the air as a clock strikes, as a thought strikes, its crazy gong. The rope breaks. The teen plunges into the same river, sound keeps traveling, and then it's gone. And then it comes back like an aftertaste. How much death can swim? How long after eating? Il pleut, it rains, ropes of cardiac tissue, time, rope swings, credit unions, bone fragments, platform sandals, 2-hour commutes. It rains all death's afternoon. So for the final poem from Toxicon, there's lots of things in here, elegies and sonnet sequence, a sonnet crown for the bacteria that killed Keats. And I'm gonna read you a sestina, and it really has some of the similar themes that I've already been reading. And if you guys know the sestina form, which I'm thinking most people here do, it's a sestet where the 6 N words cycle and repeat and cycle and repeat. Sestina gratitude. Thank you in gold particle, thank you in wave. Thank you any zygote worth its salt, bend down to be capacitated, bend down to take your crown. Thank you parting membrane, thank you for the crown that wants to be a noose. Thank you, slip down, cervical membrane. Thank you, fontanelle, you have turned this brain into a fosse. Thank you, scouts, spreading out across the grain. Your doggy snouts now pick up the scent of blood. Thank you, thought, that salty tinsel ribboning the $100 bill. Thank you, rib bone, the brain mints double currency, twin waves at twin across a river. You, my brother, and you, my veiny border. For you, I roll my syndrome down to 0. I stop the clock. A stopped clock's a doubled crown, and it says 0, 0, while the crowd shouts from the bleachers, bleached of stain, shouts and shall nots as the ball crest sinks down to fill the basket like a crown upside down. Water and salt fill the isolation tank where this moment is suspended. You and your brain rock there, sapless as a brain-dead babe. Sad coat, trench coat, dressed for war, a drain to drain the wound and a drain fitted to the heart, crowded with gold husks, principles, fixtures, faults, bacteria, you golden hand that melts the bone. Shout at the bullet smelter, 2 lungs hung up in the steeple, salt lantern blown out, corrosive, smearing the sea with lawn down. Down comes the beam, it decays and sheds. It lays a lacquer down under the golden dome. The brain in its jacket shines and shines and lies down in the salt marsh, down in the kennel with the hunting dogs crowded with breath, and accommodates a gold bullet in both hemispheres. The bullet shouts, thoughts steeple down. You lie down like a river as thought spills out on straw. You are the liquor that steams down the seam of the jeans. You the suture stemmed with gold, stout rivets, miner's hammer. You the hammer to the brain. You the footfall of the scouts, shouts in the thicket. You the crowd that waves its tickets. Blonde train smeared with light, trail of salt which marks the battle dress like a wing beat drawn on surge. You the surge, the shout. You the battle dead. The widow's salt, the bullet in the crown. You, the salted aquifer, the pulseless fontanelle. So those are the poems of Toxicon. But as this is kind of a family reading, and a lot of you will know that unfortunately I was rushing and rushing to finish this manuscript before the birth of our 3rd infant, and she was born on September 29th. So yesterday was her 3rd birthday, with an unexpected and unexpectedly grievous birth defect, and she was flown away right away to a children's hospital in Indianapolis, and she lived 13 days. And I miss her so terribly, and not much to say about that other than read you some poems. I think I wrote I couldn't write it all, of course, and then when spring returned in the spring, I was so angry that spring came back without her that I just started writing again, and these like coruscating, very angry poems, so angry about spring coming without Arachne. So I'll read you a handful of these poems. The first one's a villanelle, post-NICU villanelle. And these poems are very much set in South Bend. So anybody who is listening who has lived here in South Bend and walked along this river will recognize a lot. Leaper Park right here will recognize a lot of South Bend in these poems. Post-NICU villanelle. Evening wear, the heron unfolds like a glove in the sky because it's spring. Peels back to expose the cool wrist of evening. Evening wear, the hero peels off his armor and walks around the bedroom flayed because it's spring. It's spring. The vets go down to the park on bikes with their bedrolls, their desert camo evening wear, even to sleep on the breast of the lawn in spring. Sweet rain, with your radioactive pearl seeding, the eyelet ribbon in your braid, this evening wear as lightly as you can upon her grave, but do not actually erase yourself from the scene. You make the spring come. And I consider that one a god who sits by your cribside and watches your monitor as evening wears on. Your green cursor blinks. Your high alarm rises, a detonator's depressed and then released, and some fate arrives like spring in cardiac collapse. But before that, your unfocused newborn's eyes peer up from your elsewhere at the camera's eye, the heat lamp, your nurse, your father, and me. We for once align. Oh, my sore eyes on spring. As flower peers into flower and flowers, that odor unfolds, a cotton diaper newer than a newborn, not even once worn the no scent of soap or air. I almost wrote hope, but no hope. And every no evening, infant, no nothing spring, you collapse and collapse. Some flower lays its cool hand across my eyes. I'm blind. I inhale you everywhere, nearby and leaving like spring. So I've said this before, but it's true. If anyone here has suffered a severe grief, one of the things about it is that it's embarrassing, humiliating. The most improbable songs or images will come into your head to keep you company at that moment. And the soundtrack of this particularly demented part of my grieving process was Duran Duran. So I wrote a couple poems here, and this is one of them with Duran Duran soundtracks. And this one's called Simon the Good. And it stars me and the St. Joseph River and some roadkill. Here we go. I'm the matron king of hell. In yoga pants and a disused bra for a laurel, shatter the scene inside your simmering ear. Like a ransom scene filmed through a shattered transom, I smear in my glamour. I make as if to justify the ways of God to man. It's my ticket in. That's why God lets me speak here, Christostomad on his couch, even though I'm derived from hell, hellish, Hellenish, Hellenic. I'm the hanged man in this version, pegged up in mine pegged jeans by mine ankles, and inversion, mine manacles are monocles. I spit out the key and squinty through the keyhole back at the unquittable world. In my raiment of gummy sunglasses and crow's wings for epaulets, I delicately squawk from the edges of things, balance unsteadily on the bust of the goddess, squawk, Aeschylus, Euphorion, and I'm gonna tell you something so bad that when you hear it, you're gonna know it's true. Like all the worst stories, it comes from the heart and it goes there too. Back here in St. Joseph County, a struck duck flies crown first into the asphalt and is stuck there with its brains for adhesive, like someone licked the pavement and sealed it, a postulette. With its cartoon feet in the air and its Jeff Koon wings, that's roadkill for you, realer than real. And the cars mill by with their wheels in reverse, heavy as chariots in a dealership commercial, and I am walking my dog by the river, a matron from hell. Look on me and despise. I am like the river, thick as beer and with a sudsy crown. There polyethylene bags drape the banks like herons, and a plastic jug rides a current with something like the determination that creases mine own brow as I attempt to burn off my lunch. The determination of garbage riding for its drain. Hey, Nani, it's spring, and everything wears a crown as it rides its thick doom to its no place. Gently brushed by pollen, by the wings of Hymenoptera, like a helicoptera performing its opera all above Indiana, bearing the babes away from their births to their births in the NICU in Indy, unapple us. Unapple us, moron God. You've turned me deophobic. The greasy tracks you leave all over the internet, the slicey DNA and the scramble chondria, the torn jeans panic like space invaders in an arcane video game. Oh, spittle pink blossom, the tree don't need no more. Shook down to slick the pavement like a pay slip, you disused killer app. Each thought strikes my brain like the spirals in a ham. Pink for Easter, sliced by something machinic. Each thought zeroes in, flies hapless and demented, festoon like a lawn dart, finds its bit of eye, spills its champagne split of pain. Then we come to our senses, suddenly alone in the end zone. So I think I'll just read the last poem in the book and be done. This poem is called Morning Once an Eidolon, and it's a line misheard from the Big Star song Stroke It Knoll. And the original song is kind of an ode, I guess. It's Morning Once us to Eidolon, something like that. But of course I heard it as Morning Once an Eidolon, and an Eidolon is the trace of a ghost, right? And so hearing that song, I mean, I really wanted that Eidolon. This is my poem, trying to make that Eidolon appear and sort of appear sonically. I mean, there's something very sonic about the way all these kind of ghostly songs and ghostly emanations presented themselves to me sonically. So, morning once an eidolon, line misheard from big stars stroke at null. That's a word poets love, because no one else wants it. You can get it cheap. Eidolon, little light that leaks when a ghost leaves. The bruisey weeds in the garden, ungoogleable and eyeless, closed around their seedy code, nearby and remote as on the edge of the galaxy. The Milky Way, naturally. They bend their necks under all that milk. Like we bent over you in your bassinet when death arrived with his postulette. Morning once an eidolon. News we couldn't refuse, we had to accept. So stroke it, Noel, and make it appear like static in the seance, ghost or house cat brushing by, the same spark that keeps the cursor lit and the neonate alive. My therapist says I need to divorce you from our crummy past together and set you to bob on the bow of the future and go walking towards you again like John Clare, always in sight and never at the hospital. But a line of dying baobab trees with their heels up in the green cheese of the moon say to each other, let's leave Earth again. I want an eidolon. So stroke it, Noel. At night, your sister walks through walls like it isn't hard, and it wasn't hard to turn and gaze on your original face. Morning once. I only screamed when they turned the ventilator off, though you survive for 8 minutes, the time it takes a sunbeam to arrive, 8 minutes idiocy, till we know the sun has ceased, and during that beneficent sans surcease. Morning once an eidolon, like the song doesn't say, so stroke it, Noel, which isn't your name. I'll say something so bad, you'll know I mean it. The day you were born was the worst day of my life. Don't hold it against me, babe, that I mean it, and then I'm so mean. I wake to canary-colored scaffolds, the contractor up in the eaves. It will cost me $15,000 and the rest of the summer. I think of Shylock shouting at his window, refusing to accept the plot's final cinch. Shylock sulking at his loom in pre-Raphaelite attire, studying the shitty city of Shalott backwards in a mirror where everybody hates him for his beautiful hair running down to the river, wherein he may conveniently strangle or drown. Shylock, I love you and hate Belmont. Shylock, morning wants an eidolon, and it wants us to be happy, and it doesn't mind our sinful artistry one bit. I summon all mine vanity, virility, and fertility, and crash my plane into the abandoned nursery. And break my brainstorm down. I mean my brainstem, starved of oxygen, eating itself, emitting its bleat like a nameless weed on the edge of the galaxy, fringing the galaxy's cunt in that wrecked room. Cool nursery. The pop song plays in eternity. On the toy turntable, a curtain lifts impossibly as the vinyl record spins. It feels the morning sun on its original face. Well, thank you. Toxicon and Arachne. So now's the part of the reading where I thank you, and I thank you on Valerie's behalf and Alyssa's and the program and Our Lady and everybody. And I also tell you that obviously these books can be ordered by their publisher and by, is it bookshop or bookstore? I can never remember anymore. Whichever the one is.
Bookshop.org. It's in the chat box as well that we sent to everybody.
Awesome. And we have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to open the chat box up for questions if you have any for your old pals, Valerie and me. But if you don't have questions, that's okay. We can all like kind of sneak away. No hard feelings.
Lovely comments, private and public, showing up in the chat box.
Very kind. All right, this is very, very kind. Thank you. And you know where to find us on the emails. And we're thinking of all of you, and we love seeing your faces and your names as we did our readings. And now I must depart. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.